So David Tisch, over from New York, is investing in lots of things. Founder and managing partner of the Box Group, co-founder of Techstars New York City, involved in lots of things like Venture for America. I've got a list of your investments here. It would take our whole 20-minute session if I go through them, but there's a few big names like Vine, which I think went to a company called Twitter, and you were in Behance and GroupMe and Hipster, and now you're in SmartThings and Fab and Karma, and this could take a while.
It could.
What do you look for?
I think that's it's sort of the general question investors get, and it's sort of a bullshit response normally. Team, market, idea, product, blah, blah, blah. What does it really mean? It probably is, to me, the core is founder product fit. Why is this the best team to build this product? There's nothing in today's internet world that isn't that doesn't have a competitor or fast follower. And so you're really have to think 5-7 years deep and say, is this the team that's going to build the big company, the category winner? And if not, you probably shouldn't invest. I'm investing pre-product, sometimes on just the deck, sometimes on a beta, sometimes on a little bit of traction, but you're really looking early. And at that point, is this team have the ability to see this thing through and win?
So how many pitches are you getting in a typical week, and what percentage end up?
So last year in 2012, I saw 4,800 deals.
Wow.
And I made 38 investments. So under 1%.
Not a good percentage.
And I think there's an expectation to try to give feedback to every pitch you get, and it's just impossible to scale that. And so I try my best to respond to every email I get and to try to provide feedback. But the more interesting thing is, while looking at that many companies, you really do have a horizontal view of the entire market. And so it's very rare that you haven't seen something that played a little bit into that space before.
And out of the less than 1%, what was it in each of those pitches that made you go, that's exciting?
Literally, I think it's a totally different rationale with each company. And so some companies, it's purely the team and just sort of their background and what they're working on that compels you. Other things, it's the idea, and you need to get comfortability around the team to say that, okay, unbelievable idea, I'm a little iffy on this team, or they're first timers, or they just dropped out of college, or they've never worked for or at a startup. And you have to extrapolate whether they're going to be able to culturally shift gears and really probably hire. And so I think from a data point thing, the most interesting thing to me is pushing a founder to make a first hire and looking at the quality of that first hire. And the founders who build the best early teams tend to build the best later teams.
And are you putting together interesting founder over here with somebody else because you've seen their pitch?
No, I hate the idea of co-founder matching. You're basically getting married to your co-founder or whatever it is, and I'm not a matchmaker, and I'm not trying to put people together while working together. I think that the chemistry of a founding team has to be there. It has to be tried and true, and a flag to me is a single founder, a founder who sort of met their co-founder through some event or anything like that. The barrier for that being interesting to me is really high.
So you're a pretty good filter. You're seeing 99.3% of businesses that you don't think are going to go anywhere. Tell us what kind of businesses now not to pitch you, not to start, where you see the market as saturated.
I'm going to not answer your question. I think that, to me, it's the founders who come in and talk about what instead of why. And I think it's the why that actually matters. Why are you doing this? Why does this matter? Why is this going to be a big company? Why is this going to impact the world? Anything along those lines, much more interesting than look at what we're doing or what the idea is.
Which is the most recent of your investments?
I invested in a mini vending machine recently.
And what does that vending machine vend?
It's actually built to fit in the back of taxis. So there's 5 products in it. They could sell gum, they could sell condoms, they could sell hand cleaner, anything like that. But the form factor is built so it can fit basically anywhere, and they're trying to spread vending to places where retail currently is not.
And you did a few investments last year. I mean, I think Fred Wilson famously didn't do very much last year. What did you see that he didn't see?
Well, I'm hoping that my companies grow up to the point where now Fred looks at them. So he's a later stage investor than I am. I'm going much earlier. We're in probably, I think, 5 deals with USV where they came in after we did the seed round. And, I see innovation. I see innovation happening across the world. As Mark Andreessen says, software is going to eat the world. And anywhere where it's not, it's going to be. And so in the past year, you've seen this revolution in hardware as well. And so the ability to manufacture and bring hardware to consumers is getting easier and easier. Also getting more noisy and crowded. So rising above that noise becomes the new challenge versus just pure manufacturing. So I think that, I'm trying to fund stuff that is probably not going to be interesting for a year or two. So I'm thinking, at least a year out before this thing is really live and big in the market. And then there are exceptions to that rule, like Vine, where they sold before they launched. And you can't predict that. I had a lot of hopes for what Vine was going to be when they launched as a standalone company. I think you got to see the power of that product when they launched through Twitter.
And in Vine's case, explain what it was that made them succeed so early. Was it personal connections? Was it a buzz, a hype?
They were, Russ and Dom, the 2 founders, are incredibly talented. Dom's a developer, Russ is a designer. The product there just won. Is you touch the product, you film that first Vine with the press down and sort of let go, and you're like, oh, that's innovative. And that's the, this Instagram for video thing has been around for a while, but this was the first company that made the actual filming of the video the interesting part. And I had sort of taken the view that taking a picture is a lot easier than taking a video. This sort of bridged that gap a little bit.
So I think you've previously talked about hype is pretty important to the startup founder. That's the main value they've got. Tell us a bit about what you mean by that.
So I think hype is vital for startups. You're too few people to not hype what you're doing up. You're never going to be able to live up to a big company. And so if you create hype, let's say your startup's here in terms of traction, but your hype's here, you now have this cushion where you're able to grow into, because the market assumes that you're a great company, even if you're not. You now have market permission to be a great company. Now, you also have market permission to totally fail, but that's a game you've played. You've already made that bet of, I'm trying to build a big company. So take that extra risk by giving yourself market permission to succeed. If your hype is here and your traction's here, you're always constantly fighting to tell the story about how good you are versus sort of letting it run on its own and going and filling that gap. So to me, especially, and it's probably more for a consumer than for enterprise startups, but the consumer startups that create the hype story, they shield off competitors because everybody will refer to them, and that creates even more hype. And that hype cycle continues to give them permission to grow into it. And I think that's a really powerful tool that I think startups are afraid to own. But yet, if you look at the best companies, they've all done that.
So you have to be a storyteller.
I think you have to be a storyteller no matter what you're doing for your startup. If you're talking to investors, if you're talking to the media, if you're talking to some group of people in London that you've never met before, you have to get them interested, especially when you're fighting the beer.
So let's break this down into a how-to. How do you create hype today around your startup?
I mean, it's harder than ever, and I think that that's the trick. I think that the hype is sort of different to me than the storytelling. The storytelling is understanding who your audience is. And so if you're in front of investors, your story is drastically different than if you're in front of users and if you're in front of media. And I think that the best founders are able to customize their story to their audience to engage anybody who's listening. And so if you're a founder and you go to a dinner party and you're unable to explain to normals what you're doing, you're bad at storytelling. Even if it's the most technically challenging thing, figure out how to explain that to your mother or to your sister, to your brother, or anybody else that doesn't understand what you're doing. And I think that when you get in front of investors, understanding why the investor's interested in what you're doing and appealing to that is much more interesting than telling the sort of deck story, if you will.
And who's doing a great example of storytelling at the moment?
I think Foursquare, if you look at their history for years, has told a great story. They've literally, if you go back to Dennis, in 2009 when he founded that company, it was the same story. I think if you look at Jason at Fab, it's very similar. Jason is on a mission. He's public and transparent with everything that company does. It's part of his story. The story is...
He's radically changed his story. I mean, that's the most famous pivot of the last year or two.
They pivoted the business early on, but the pivot came from something within their first startup. So it wasn't a total start over, which I think is a huge difference, pivot to start over. And I think that the story Jason's told about what Fab today has been consistent from day one. We're building a home for design and the next great e-commerce company. And I think he lives that in every single time he talks about the company. He's never, ever once said he's willing to sell the company. He's not on the, like, there are so many things that he's just blunt about, and I think it's very transparent, and I think for customers, you're willing to build an affiliation with that brand because of that transparency.
So you were relatively early in the incubator space. Everybody has an incubator now. You know, I've set up 6 or 7 just this afternoon with people I've met here. There's a bubble, isn't there?
There is definitely an accelerator bubble, 100%. I mean, there are 3,000 companies going through accelerators in the United States alone, year over year. And if you're expecting all 3,000 of them just because you got into an accelerator that you're going to succeed, you're crazy.
But Techstars has come to London recently. So why do you see there's still an opportunity here?
So I think that if you think about brand, there's probably 2 brands in the accelerator space that stand out. It's Techstars and Y Combinator. And if I'm an entrepreneur thinking about joining an accelerator, the first thing I realize is they're not free. And just because someone hangs a sign on their door and says, we're an accelerator and we have mentors and we're going to help you, doesn't mean that you're going to succeed because you got in. And I think that as a founder, what I would do is take a step back and say, don't I want to get into one of the best ones, not just a one? And to me, Techstars, Y Combinator stand way above the rest from a results. I think there are probably 10 others that have results. But if I'm joining a brand new accelerator that opened up this afternoon because you met some people, I wouldn't give you 6, 8, 10% of my company to come hang out in your office and meet some people. It's crazy.
That was a very good pitch, by the way. But a lot of big incumbent companies, Telefonica in the telco sector, see that if you create an internal incubator, you can get access to talent and new ways of thinking. This can't be such a bad thing.
Look, I think it matters what the founders are starting a company for. So if you're starting a company to help a big company innovate or to get one big partnership and build your company around that one big partnership, I think that makes a ton of sense. I think the entrepreneurs that are going for the next great entrepreneur-based company are not going to join a corporate accelerator. I don't see any parallel there. I think that you're going to have people who are unhappy at their job or want to start something but aren't really sort of there yet. Perfect place for them to go hang out and meet some people.
So you personally haven't been to London for a while. I think I was told it was 19 years. Give us an honest assessment of your impression of the entrepreneurial mindset.
Everybody's been incredibly mean to me today. No, I don't know enough about the London startup scene. I think from my perspective in New York, London, Berlin are probably the 2, and then some stuff in Scandinavia in general are the 3 areas of innovation. I'm aware of all the effort, and yesterday we went to 10 Downing and heard the government effort behind startups here. I think it's awesome. So I think the fact that there's government money behind startups, there's tax breaks and things like that, those are all good things. I think the thing that makes a community rise is great companies. And so until an entrepreneur can look and say, I want to be like that, and that person is a story that they can relate to, I think it's hard to sort of force the community up, if you will.
And when you're in New York and you mix with other investors and entrepreneurs, how much does your conversation include companies from the UK? Are you aware of any of the big names coming out of London?
I would say 0.
So we're not great at telling our story.
No, and I think that there's also a big gap between coming from Europe into America versus America into Europe. I think that second path is a lot easier. The brand, if the brand's solely in the UK, there's a translation of that brand to America that doesn't always play out. And I think the test market in the UK is interesting, but it's not as big as the US. And so if you're looking for a test market, pick one that can scale and like New York as a test market's awesome because if you win New York, you might have a company that never needs to scale. It's a big enough test market to support an entire company. There are companies, Fresh Direct, Seamless Web, that support the local residents of New York that really could have just stayed in New York and built a huge business. They've slowly scaled. I think Seamless is, they came into London at some point, but that was 8-9 years after they were founded in New York.
So you're from a family of exceptional entrepreneurs. If you didn't have the day job at the moment, if you were pitching the Box Group with your startup, what kind of startup would it be?
The most exciting startup that I've seen in a long time, you guys saw on stage today, was Smart Things. And I think that what they're really doing is trying to make your day-to-day life a little bit easier and sort of remove technology, but let technology help you. And I think that's fascinating. I'm really lazy. And any technology that allows me to be lazier, I think is tremendous. And this is a product that is open in every which way to let innovation happen, both on the hardware and the software side. So as people build stuff on the Smart Things platform, everybody's lives are going to get a little bit easier. And I think that's fascinating. So I would focus on how to actually impact the day-to-day living of residents, probably at a local level, and then scale from there.
So let's get your instant views on whether you're short or long on various sectors. So the Internet of Things.
Long.
3D printing.
Long.
Crowdfunding.
Short. Crowdfunding of startups. Short. Crowdfunding in general, like arts and a lot of the stuff Kickstarter does outside of the product stuff, 100% long. Crowdfunding of startups, very short.
Taking on the big credit card companies.
Medium.
Mobile apps.
So mobile apps is weird because there's this balance between sort of, I built an app and I built a company. And I think that line is really hard to tell in the app world. Definitely long mobile over time. I think that there's probably a different model for building apps in terms of how to build a company, unless they're doing something with a sort of a business behind the front-facing app, i.e. Uber. There's a business there. The app is just the way you interact with it. I think a consumer-facing sort of app that sort of catches fire and spikes down is a really hard company to invest in right now.
Online education.
Education's pretty broken, so you have to assume that technology is going to fix that somehow.
Mobile health.
I'm terrible at healthcare, so I've undecided.
So what have you learned in your journey based on your own screw-ups? Tell us. Esther was bold enough to be honest about things that hadn't worked. What have you messed up with?
I think the biggest thing I've realized is I'm probably not a founder of a company. I don't think that I have it in my DNA at this point to go start an internet company. I look at entrepreneurs and admire them. I think the risk that entrepreneurs are taking to put themselves out there, to take chances, to quit everything else in life and focus on building something is incredible. And David Lee from SV Angel had written a post about how he's not a founder. I haven't written a post yet. I'm not necessarily there. But I give, I think the empathy I have and the understanding I have for founders and the situation they're in is, I think it's incredible.
So last question before you're mobbed with another 5,000 pitches. Give a message to the people in this room who are about to pitch you that they wouldn't have learned elsewhere.
I think you need to understand what it is you're going for. And so when I ask a founder why they're doing this, one of the answers it's okay is I want to get rich, or I want to work for myself, or I want to have a business that I can call my own for the next 30 years. But being upfront with those goals allows an investor to understand why you're doing this and the opportunity that they're looking at. And I think founders skip that part. And not every company should be backed by investors who are going for venture returns. There are a ton of angel investors who are going for angel returns, but trying to pitch an angel investor who does venture investing on an angel business, no fit. And so I'm doing this professionally. I'm looking for, over time, the returns that a venture capitalist are. So the idea of backing a lifestyle business, which I think is an unfairly bad word, because if you can start a business that pays for your lifestyle, you did really good. But it's not the type of business that I think professional investors are looking to invest in. And I think there are too many founders that don't understand that gap.
Great advice from a man on the front line. Please could we thank from New York, David Tisch.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.